Pete Souza is a photographer and best-selling author whose work has shaped how we see history. He served as the chief White House photographer for President Barack Obama and was also a White House photographer for President Ronald Reagan. He has been inducted into the International Photography Hall of Fame. His book, Obama, An Intimate Portrait, debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and is one of the best-selling photography books of all time. His follow-up book, Shade, A Tale of Two Presidents, also topped the New York Times list. Pete has provided an eyewitness account of the immense responsibilities carried by the world's most powerful leader. And today, on the Crit House, Pete Souza discusses his myFIVE images from William Albert Allard, Frank O'Brien, Bob Jackson, Ansel Adams, and W. Eugene Smith.
Well, I guess what I do is I photograph my granddaughters now. That's what I do. No, I mean, I think I'm, probably best known for my work as official White House photographer for President Obama. But, I have a long career in photojournalism. I worked for newspapers right at the beginning of my career for 4 or 5 years, and then also worked as an official White House photographer during the Reagan administration, the last 5 years of the Reagan administration. Have freelanced for a number of years and also worked in the early 2000s for the Chicago Tribune, based in their DC bureau. And so, I've kind of had a very varied career in newspapers, magazines, and being an official White House photographer.
When you were White House photographer, which must have been just an amazing job. Like, are you a journalist? Are you a documentarian? Are you telling a story? Like, what's in your mind about what you're doing? Is it just, are you capturing the moments? So I'm just trying to like when you're doing that job, what are you thinking about as you're capturing images?
Foremost in my mind was I was thinking that I was documenting the presidency for history. Every photograph that I made, I knew would end up in the National Archives. With Reagan, there was no such thing as social media. So a lot of my photographs were not seen till, many, many years later. With Obama, social media had come into play in a big way, and the administration made use of my photographs, much more sooner, like while the administration was going on, So, but I didn't think I kept thinking to myself, even then, my job is not so that the White House can post a photograph on Instagram or on Flickr or whatever. It's like my job is documenting this presidency for history. That was the foremost thing in my mind.
Right.
And my background is as a photojournalist, and it's not like you walk into the Oval Office as an official White House photographer and suddenly you start photographing things in a different way. I mean, it's inherently in my brain and heart that photographing as a photojournalist, even if I'm sure photojournalists would argue would argue vehemently that I'm not a photojournalist being a White House photographer. I get that.
Yeah.
But it's not like I do anything differently other than I'm thinking more long term. Like, I'm not thinking, when you're a photojournalist, especially working for a newspaper, foremost in your mind is, I want to get the front page tomorrow morning. I want my picture to be on the front page.
Right.
Whereas, as an official White House photographer, you're not thinking that way. You're thinking like, I want to get the best picture, for history right now.
Yeah. Well, so we asked you to come on, as we do with other photographers and photo people, to decide on 5 images that have had some influence on you. And you have chosen 5. Did you
did you have like a thought process that you went through in deciding those images? What can we tell people about what we're going to see today?
Yeah, I think it's an impossible task.
But you did
Because
it.
I think for me, I'm still influenced by photographs that I see. I mean, there's a lot of new upcoming photographers that I've never met that are influencing me, or at least, I look at their photographs and I think I'm always the learner. So I'm always trying to think about my work in more current terms. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does.
And I think that it was really difficult for me to come up with five. And I think that I was influenced a little bit by Sam Abel, his talk with you, in that Sam made reference. I'm paraphrasing because it was a while ago that I watched that, but that he made some comment about the very early influences were the most important for him. And I guess I feel sort of the same way. I think pretty much all of them are like early, well, there's one that's early in my life, and then the rest are early in my career, had
Well,
an impact.
let's take a look at Pete Souza's myFIVE images. So your first image is an assassination. Tell us about this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, really, I could have chosen probably half a dozen photos for this one. I was 8 years old when JFK was assassinated. I think this is the first time where still photographs spoke to me as a kid. And I ended up over that weekend, those 4 days of mourning after JFK was shot and killed, cutting out pictures out of the newspaper. Cecil Stoughton's famous picture of LBJ getting sworn in, AP wire photo of Jackie in front of the coffin. The day of the funeral, John Kennedy Jr. saluting as the coffin left the White House. And then on I believe this was Sunday, I was watching TV, little black and white TV, when Oswald was going to be booked at this jail in Dallas, and they were parading him through. Now I'm watching this live on
Wow.
TV as it happens, and there's all this commotion, and the announcer's like, Oswald's been shot, Oswald's been shot. Like, I was watching this live, and I didn't see what had just happened. Like, it was just a bunch of commotion, and you couldn't really see what happened. There was no instant replay then.
Right. Yeah.
So you couldn't like go back frame by frame. I think even if you had, you wouldn't have seen that much. And then the next day in the New Bedford Standard Times, they published two photographs. One says Associated Press wire photo, and you clearly see the gun, and it's just a split second before this picture. And then right beside it was this picture. And I went, oh my God, like talk about like a moment. I
Yeah.
mean, in terms of this made it absolutely clear what had just happened, even though I had watched it live on TV.
Right.
The power of this still image just, I mean, blew an 8-year-old kid away. I think it cemented in my brain subconsciously the power of a still photograph, which is why I chose this photograph.
Wow. What a powerful discussion on that historic moment. Thanks for talking about that. Your second image goes a completely different direction as we head to the ice. Tell us about this one, this Getty image.
Yeah, so I go back to my junior year at Boston University. I'm in the journalism school, and it's September of what would have that been, 1974. And I'm taking my first photography class in the journalism school, photo one. he asked us to write down photographers that we admired or were that influenced us in some respect. And I honestly did not know the names of any really famous photographers.
Hmm.
It was not like part of my thing where I was actually studying photography. I knew I was interested in photography, but it wasn't like I had studied the masters. But there was one guy, I was a big, huge sports fan, and there was one guy whose photo credit I always looked at, and that was Frank O'Brien, because he was the sports photographer for the Boston Globe.
Yep.
And I was always amazed at the pictures that he came up with. And it was sort of like I was a huge sports fan. Here's a guy making his living photographing sports and making these incredible pictures. It was like, well, Frank O'Brien, like that was the only name I could come up with for this exercise in my photo class to name a photographer that influenced me or that I admired. So I went through some of Frank's pictures. He died fairly recently, last couple of years. And Stan Grosfeld, famous two-time Pulitzer Prize winner for the Boston Globe, had written a nice remembrance of him and included some of the photos that Frank had taken. So anyway, I chose this one as to honor Frank and his influence on a young kid just learning photography. Can I say one other thing about this photograph that
Please do.
just came to mind is this is picturing Phil Esposito, who was, I think he had gotten a record for the most number of goals one year. So it's also funny to see none of the players had helmets back then.
Yeah.
But anyway, Esposito was known for being like a collecting the puck in front of the net, and that's how he got his goals. It wasn't like he was like a great slap shot shooter. His like a lot of his goals were like garbage goals.
Yeah. Hey,
And
goals a
I
goal.
remember I remember when somebody came out with a bumper sticker the year that he scored. I think he scored 76 goals one year. And most of them were like goals like this. And somebody came out with a bumper sticker, and the bumper sticker said, Jesus saves, comma, and Esposito scores on the rebound, which I thought was like I thought was the funniest bumper sticker I've ever seen.
I had never heard that. I love it. A great story. Your third image, W. Eugene Smith. Tell us about this one and how this is important to you, sir.
Oh, for many reasons. So after I realized I didn't know any, famous photographers, somehow, I don't know if it was my mom or somebody, but I got a hold of the old Time Life series of books. I think there was like a series of 12 books on photography. And there was one on documentary photography, one on photojournalism, one on color photography, so on and so forth. And I would devour those books. And that's how I learned about W. Eugene Smith, great photo essayist for, mostly Life magazine, country doctor, nurse midwife. I mean, I studied all those great photo essays, Minamata that he did in Japan. But I always thought this was an unusual W. Eugene Smith photograph. It's a picture of his two kids. And it was after he had been injured in World War II. And according to him, this was the first photograph that he made when he got out of the hospital. It's a beautiful image. I think I'm probably influenced by his body of work more than I am this particular image.
Right. Yeah.
But this image has become a lasting importance in my life for a couple of reasons. One, I have a sign print of this picture.
Wow.
It's been hanging on my wall for a long time, many, many years. And he was oftentimes broke. And when he would need medical care, He would, in lieu of paying the doctor, he would give the doctors signed prints. And somehow I was able to get a hold of one of those prints. So I bought a print that he had given to a doctor to pay for some medical bills. And I think one, and two, the other second reason why it's taken on added significance to me is I now have two granddaughters, and I am trying to document their lives. So I look at this picture, and in some ways I think of them, these two little girls, even though this is a boy and a girl.
Yeah. No, but that's a sweet story. It is such a, I remember seeing this image when I was young. And I was the same way you. I didn't know who took pictures. I didn't look at the bylines or the photo credits in magazines. But then when I started into photography and learned about W. Eugene Smith and all of those projects that you mentioned, including the Pittsburgh Project, I remember at some point coming along and realizing that this was a W. Eugene Smith image and kind of being blown away because it's nothing like the rest of his work.
Exactly. And and it was I mentioned in passing Minamata, his documentation of that tragedy in Japan. I saw that original exhibit in New York at ICP. And it was probably one of the first photography exhibits that I ever saw. And like I was like so blown away by not just the content of the pictures, but of his prints.
Oh,
That he had spent so much time in the darkroom making these prints, and they were just like every print was like, perfect. And I think, because of him, and then, the next picture I show, working in the darkroom became a huge part of something that I want to perfect. I think in that same Life series was when I first saw, Moonrise over Hernandez by Ansel Adams.
yeah. So let's
And,
let's talk about Ansel's image as we go to New Mexico.
I was, blown away by this is obviously not photojournalism, it's landscape photography, but just the beauty of photography, and trying to learn about the zone system, which was in many ways over my head. But at the same time, reading about what he had a book out called The Print, and devouring that book and just learning about his perfection in every print that he made. And I became a big fan of his work and try to emulate his perfection in the darkroom with, pictures that were completely different, meaning I wasn't doing landscape photography. I was doing, photojournalism,
Yeah.
but trying to make artful prints of my photojournalism work was very much an influence of Ansel Adams, and in particular this amazing picture of moonrise in New Mexico.
So let's go on to your final image from William Albert Allard. Tell us about this one, Pete Souza.
Well, this was the hardest one to choose, because I sort of wanted to also include something from Cartier-Bresson, famous French photographer, and his work of capturing the moment, is something that I always strive to do. But at the same time, I wanted to have at least one color photograph in here, because I clearly started studying the masters of color photography, Bill Allard, Sam Abel, Dave Harvey, Ernest Haast,
Yes.
many great color photographers. And I think I liked Allard's work because he was combining trying to photograph moments, candid photographs, and doing those in color. That I became influenced by the likes of him and the others that I just mentioned. He had done a series of, I think it was just called Out West in National Geographic, and certainly his color photography has had, an influence on me.
Thanks.
Well, and I would encourage anyone that is a student of photography to get a copy of his book. I hope I have this right, called The Photo Essay, which includes this picture as well as many others. And then Sam Abel's book, Stay This Moment.
Amazing book. So Pete Souza, it really great images to talk about, and love your stories about them as well. So I greatly appreciate you coming onto the Crit House, and really honestly also thank you for just all of the work you have done in the photographic community. You've really made a mark, I think, in this country, and letting people understand what photography can be. Thank you for that.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Yeah. And thank you all for watching the Crit House.